happy to introduce our first featured reader of the night. Originally from upstate New York, Josiah Mackessy journeyed to the SF Bay Area in 2007 to return to college. This voyage led him to the creative writing program at SFSU, where he continues to pursue his main passion of writing and studying literature. He can be found at any given time pursuing his other passions as well, which include fixing his Volkswagen Camper van and traversing the greater SF Peninsula by moped. So everyone, please welcome Josiah.
It's always something to get used to, the microphone. Let's see. Right. I have some excerpts from stories, from characters from my worlds. So I'm going to start here with the first one. Assigning Lyle to ride along with me was the one thing about the delivery that torqued me the most. Lyle was the new guy in the kitchen and bath department. He transferred from the lot, and pushing carts from one side of the parking lot to the other was Lyle's gift. He had crew-cut hair, and a tattoo of his girlfriend's name stood out on his left shoulder. He talked about her incessantly. After every story he told, he laughed as though there were a silent punchline that only he could hear. He drove a pickup truck with a fake set of testicles on the bumper hitch, and a sticker of Calvin pissing on the Ford logo. The most original aspect of the truck is that he had his girlfriend's garter and flowers from the senior prom hanging from the rearview mirror. I didn't have the heart to tell him that the last time he had any business being at a high school dance was nearly a decade ago, unless he was the chaperone. There were a lot of things that I didn't have the heart to tell him. Now Lyle was next to me, droning on about his motocross trophy and the massive jump he pulled to get it off. It was a feeling of, I don't know, when you feel like all of a sudden there's nothing beneath you. He struggled to find the right word. Weightlessness? I threw it out there. Yeah, that's more like it. He was swigging from a 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew. Right then a car turning left cut me off, and I slammed on the brakes and swerved to miss it. Learn how to drive, asshole, I shouted as I pounded the horn in with my fist. I got my bearings and was looking left as some Roman candles went off on the front lawn and little kids in bathing suits were getting running starts as they jumped onto a slip and slide. As my eyes scanned right, a blurry object not much bigger than a football darted out in the road, and I swerved instinctively and missed it with my front tires. Right as I swerved back, the dog's survival instinct kicked and it turned around right into my rear tire. I felt a dull thump like I hit a speed bump, and I pulled over and heard a persistent yelping. The scene that lay before me felt like some bizarre alternate reality, a moment of family tranquility gone hideously wrong. As I hopped out, a guy wearing an SU sweater grabbed the convulsing and yelping dog and rushed it over to the Dodge Neon in the driveway. 3 little girls in swimsuits that couldn't have been older than 9 sobbed next to an older man who stood at a grill wearing his apron. The girls were soaking wet from splashing in the pool. "Will he be okay, Grandpa?" said the middle girl, clasping at his forearm with wet hands. And I can still see the signs of the transition out of middle age setting in on his face, the thin wisps of hair that covered his receding hairline, hair that was slightly grayer than the hair on his chest which poked out about the apron. I saw the vague outline on his chest of the premature pacemaker that I swore I could hear ticking faster and faster. His face was flushed red. His right hand was holding tongs, which he kept clenching and unclenching unconsciously. The ticking sound was actually the sizzle of the grill mixing with the tick of the sprinkler spraying water on the front lawn. The meat he was tending to was burning. He didn't notice as our eyes locked for that split second. "Sir," I started. He rested a large forearm around the shoulder of the girls, whose sobs cut through the air like abrupt hiccups. "Not now," he said, and strode over to help his guests rush the dog off to the vet. Far below the lowest recesses of my stomach, I felt my heart beat, a heavy, sodden reptilian mass of papier-mâché that emitted a pulse and slowly pumped the blood one more beat through the maze. I handed his wife my contact info with my phone number and climbed back into the truck. "You're such a liar," John said over the speakerphone as I sat in the truck. "That's your new nickname, Larry the Liar. You're the boy who cried wolf." Next to me, Lyle chuckled. "Enough with the analogies, John. I think the dog's dead. I had to have killed it." John got quiet when he realized I wasn't kidding, and he said, "Larry, your first priority is delivering that fridge on time like we promised the customer. We'll discuss the dog when you get back." "You don't think I should wait to hear from them before I take off?" I said. "No, Larry, you need to stay focused on the task at hand. Believe me, nothing will change with the dog between now and then. You're already running late enough as it is." "Hey, John, why don't you tell me that story you like, the one about the Good Samaritan?" And just like that, the phone went dead. I stared at it for a second and put it on vibrate. Man, Lyle laughed, you had to flatten that dog. I'll bet they name it Pancake if it makes it. Lyle, I said, rubbing my temples, please don't talk until after this fridge gets delivered. We continued in silence at 25 miles an hour the rest of the way to the woman's house, passing cul-de-sacs and golf course manicured front lawns with 3-car garages on each house. I wanted bisque. What is this? The woman was pointing at the fridge on the dolly that I had just rolled across the drop cloth, which I had laid down carefully through her immaculate front foyer. My first reaction was to run. The crystal china on the shelves surrounding me on all sides made me afraid to turn around. And meanwhile, my phone started to vibrate like crazy in my pocket, and I reached in my pocket and hit the ignore button. I glanced over my shoulder and saw that Lyle had checked out. He was staring somewhere off in outer space with the look he uses when he wants to send a customer the subliminal message to scram and find someone else to help him. I mentally counted to 3 backwards as I eased the dolly forward and rested the fridge on the tiled floor of her kitchen. This next excerpt is from the middle of one of my stories. Here. All right. Always tense moments. So if I didn't have enough on my plate to begin with, now Jill's bitching was incessant. It was like my leaking bathroom faucet drip that got worse until I finally had to fix it. The faucet leaked forever in a steady drip, until one day what was left of the washer finally gave way to a steady stream of piping hot water that would scald you if you weren't careful. And that was Jill. I could still see the steam rising off of her. In the back seat, Damien's crying set off his sister Lily, so our argument had a nice orchestra pit going in full blare as I drove. Why should it bother Jill now that I was going to be late? Didn't matter if you were 2 minutes late or 2 hours late. Late was late, period, end of story. I was searching for a parking spot in front of the store she rented, and pulled in behind a beat-up pickup truck that was double parked. It's amazing how someone can park like a complete buffoon. I muttered under my breath. Jill kept it up. The blast rattled the whole house. The babies are still terrified. I stepped out of the car and looked in the back seat at the twins' crying faces. I saw Damien's car seat leaning forward. Damn it, I said, why isn't Damien's seatbelt on? I gently lifted up the door so it would shut just right, which set Jill off in a new direction. I clicked the seatbelt in place. Hello, the car's falling apart, she said. Maybe it's time for a new one? She wasn't anywhere near finished. She was never finished. She was still talking when I gave her a quick kiss on the cheek and hopped out of the car. I felt the door slam behind me before she could finish her sentence. Chunks of metal and rust fell. I wished I could have stayed to hash it out, but the argument was an old one, and I knew it would wait for me. So, Justice was my 1995 Caprice station wagon. She was what you'd call a sleeper. Sure, she was so old and rusty by that point that anyone would have guessed what was under the hood but me. That would be the LT-1 350, the police package, which was the reason I named her Justice in the first place. It looked like a tired, wimpy station wagon, packed an engine that pushed close to 400 horsepower, with limited modifications I'd done. Sure, the police patrol lights were long gone, and the salt had long since taken its toll on the undercarriage, but there was something else about that car. I could never get rid of it. Jill had been pestering me to get a newer car for a while. Burns too much gas, she'd say. I hate driving the thing in the snow. Look at how nice Tanya's Honda Civic is in the snow. She barely fills it up. And that was like Jill. Tanya did something and she had to do it too. How could I explain that I bought that car as a senior in high school from a police auction when my uncle who died the next year? It was an inside deal because Uncle Chad was a veteran on the police force. He went before his time, a massive heart attack right in the middle of a routine traffic stop, while his partner stood right there. Every time I would take Justice out into the countryside, I would open her up watching the cornfields and telephone poles race by faster and faster as the needle climbed on the dash. 130 miles an hour I'd once hit, but that was then and gas was cheaper 6 years ago. Besides, I had a family to think about these days. Come on, would you honestly feel safe getting into a crash in one of those tin cans? I'd reply. The store was chaos. Unopened boxes lay in the middle of the aisle, inexcusable. I stepped around them to get to the beer cooler. My shift began in 15 minutes, and the line was backed up with only one of the 2 registers working. There was another employee in the aisle downstocking, doing his best not to get noticed. I stood there in line with my pack of diapers in the basket and a 40-ounce bottle of Miller High Life. I would allow myself that, I figured, and hell if I hadn't earned it. But the line was growing in the wrong direction. First came the lady paying in half in food stamps, getting food I couldn't afford, more of my tax money at work. My eyes had to bore holes into her back, trying to mentally will a fire to light under her as she sifted through her purse in slow motion. She wore a tank top t-shirt and a camouflage cargo pants. Out of the freckles on her left shoulder there was a tattoo of a tombstone with flowers around it, with feathers underneath surrounding the date. No doubt some situation was entirely avoidable. Then came the 90-year-old lady with a whole book of coupons wanting to pay with a third-party check, haggling over the 2-for-1 deal on milk that had expired yesterday. To top it all off, the girl at the register spoke some barely dialect of the English language. She stabbed at the register with one finger. "Price check on milk," she said over the microphone to her invisible coworker. Would it ever end? I tried to go into that calm place, where I shut out everything around me, just like the counselor had told me to. Thought of how quick I'd butchered the deer that morning and carried the leftover gut pile into the woods and buried them, and how there was now meat in the freezer I didn't have to pay for. Overhead, the fluorescent lights hummed and were interrupted as the compressor of the ice freezer came to life on the same breaker. It was right then that the first gunshot stabbed my ears, followed by the second and the third. I looked out the front window of the store to catch a glimpse of the ski mask as the robbers ran past, leaving the liquor store 2 buildings down. All right. This next excerpt is about a cat. But not only about a cat. So the cat's name was Lady Gray. Lady Gray wasn't the reason Sarah broke up with me. Sarah broke up with me one evening when she came into the Airstream and I was playing Super Mario Bros. 1, the way I'd done religiously every Sunday evening since the game discovered me back in 1985. I don't play any video games except for Super Mario, and I was lost in the land of mushroom and bricks, land of hammerhead monkeys and flame-breathing dragons, and I was at that juncture in the game where you can either warp to level 8 or go on to level 4-2. And I was powering into those forgotten levels with reckless abandon, taking in the world of towering gray treetops and elevators and bullets that whizzed by when Sarah snapped. "What the fuck are you doing? We're supposed to be going out to dinner and a play. My friends are waiting." The weed had gotten my mind to that sweet spot when I hit pause. "Listen, I know you came over to eat dinner. When I'm done beating Mario, we'll eat." "Are you fucking blind?" she screamed and kicked a Nintendo off the coffee table, and it cracked when it landed on the floor. And that started the famous last fight that earned her the nickname Psycho Sarah. The neighbors even heard our fight, and that's saying something when you live off the grid on a 10-acre chunk of property. I'm not being fair, though. Sarah was an incredible girlfriend in many ways. She would look after me. She even nursed me back to health after my run-in with the redwood tree. I crashed my moped trying to navigate a hairpin turn at 45 miles an hour with a 12-pack between my legs. I was sipping a tall can of Foster's when the next thing I knew it was wham, right into a redwood tree with unopened dented beer cans everywhere, and I was out cold and came to barely able to make the call box. A fractured forearm, a bruised spleen, it wasn't pretty, but that didn't bother Sarah, and she and Lady Gray nursed me back to health, taking turns. Lady Gray would come and plant herself on my chest near my throat and purr erratically, something she would only do when she was scared or upset. She would sit rigid, and I could feel the tension in her as she kept me company while I healed. And that was the last time I touched alcohol. None of that bothered Sarah, but a cat that wouldn't use a litter box made her ballistic. She was 37, I was 25. She was erratic, erotic, exotic, ecstatic, neurotic, but not always in that order. She said I was chaotic, chasing windmills all the time. She said I was a dreamer, but I told her I wasn't the only one. Then she broke my Nintendo. She never understood the game. It's a waste of time. It's for children, she'd say. I tried to tell her its origins, how in Japan there's ancient legends and folk tales of people who wander into the forest and eat magic mushrooms that help them double in size. That it wasn't a game, it was an experience. I tried to tell her that the game is a matter of perception, that it's a different experience between beating the game big and beating the game small. But at the time of that fight, I was thinking, what the fuck, a play? You want me to dress up so I can hang out with your friends and watch some pirates in a place called Penzance right in the middle of level 5? That was back when Lady Gray, still her old cantankerous self, was still up and about before her age had set in. That was a good 10 years before the flames of fire swept up the mountain in a living, contagious wall. When the fire ravaged the mountaintop, I lost everything. My Airstream burned to the axles, and with it everything I owned. 30 mopeds all charred and twisted and burned with deformed, melted tires. My collection of Daisy air rifles, twisted and melted mixture of tin and plastic. My goats, my chickens, all gone. My bee box where I get all the pollen burned up. In the aftermath, I walked the blackened soil into the mist of the tree trunks that pointed to the sky like angry, charred fingers all gnarled and accusing. I stepped slowly and soft through the sensitive ash in the ground, and it felt like I was walking on the surface of the moon as I stooped and examined the birdhouses I had built the year before. I lifted the top off and saw the tiny brittle-beaked skeletons of the babies who nested burnt around them. The Lady Gray was still nowhere to be found, and I combed over every inch of the mountain property that I'd called home since I was 8 years old. Fire can devastate, fire can poison, but fire can also renew and rebuild. Fire can teach us the hard way to see what we're unable or unwilling to see on our own. And I appreciate the fire for having been there, for having helped me regain and reclaim my chakra, but the knowledge is fragile, and after all, what is poison but medicine disguised? Medicine disguised. You've got to stare into the medicine and open yourself to it before you can heal. The first fire first came to me in a dream, then it turned real. It was in the early first light of the morning inside my airstream when I dreamed of fire inside the hollowed out trunk of an old growth tree. I dreamed that I sat alongside my brethren inside the trunk, and that we all pushed the cedar smoke into us and inhaled it 4 times before we entered the tree from the south in a clockwise circle to our seats on the dirt floor. And I watched as one by one ancient lava rocks the size of a baby's head were brought in on a pitchfork made of elk antlers. Glowing orange from the fire they'd sat in the long night before, at least 8 of them. And I stared into the glowing fissure in one of the rocks as the woman spread the cedar chips on the rocks and they burst into tiny white sparks. In front of me across the rocks sat a man and a woman, and I stared at the man and at the deep lines of his ancient face and his big bushy eyebrows that were half white and half black still in his hands that looked like he'd been hauling in fishing nets for 10 lifetimes, and then back at her with her round eyes and her deep smile and the redness from the heat in her face that radiated the beauty that sprung from so deep inside the both of them that it traveled into the earth beneath them, beneath the surface. And with that beauty I saw back at least 5,000 years to both of their ancestors sitting in the same spot performing the same ritual. It was then that the elk-hide doors went down and I felt pitch blackness except for the rocks in the center that were slowly cooling to a dull glow when the water was first ladled onto them. And the first steam hit, and I felt the agony of my will fighting against my physical self telling me to bolt. Several songs at once were being sung, and I felt the completeness of human emotions in that instant. I felt the purity of these prayers as they prayed in a circle for our friends in the east and in the south and in the west and in the north, and I wanted to pray too, but I was silenced by the command and the sound of the woman's voice as she prayed for relations. It was then that the nausea started growing in my stomach. I watched as some of the others got sick into the rocks in the center, and the nausea was growing, but I managed to fight it when the first round ended, and the door opened and several of us piled out and exited south, and were met by the fog drip that pelted our hot bodies like tiny cool needle pricks, and I laid down on a cypress log and closed my eyes.
Mm.